which is, in fact, now. Good evening. Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. This Hangout on Air is live. Sigmund, I hope you tweeted us out.
Oh, yeah, tweet.
Yes, we'll tweet this out to everyone. Follow Sigmund Bloom on Twitter, at Sigmund Bloom, at Cecil Lammy, at Matt Waldman, at Gene Bramall, and at The Audible. It's time for The Audible Live each and every Thursday night. Why, Sig is tweeting, Matt. That sounds dirty. How are you doing, Mr. Waldman?
I'm doing just dandy, Had some interesting conversations with a quarterback coach this week, and had a good time talking about specific top prospects who are freshmen and sophomores that are going to be fun to talk about in about 6 to 8 months, or maybe 3 years and 6 to 8 months.
Well, we'll be going through some Jimmy Garoppolo talk tonight, Matt. So let's dial that one up. As interesting to see Mr. Happy Feet in the preseason. Dr. Gene Bramall is happy that he's here, I hope.
Happy, joy for you Ren and Stimpy fans out there.
Yes, get the space madness. You've coveted my ice cream bar, Sigmund Bloom. Welcome, brother.
It is very happy, joyous night. We have the first dress rehearsal game going on. We've got Seattle and Dallas. It's going to start. Always interesting to see the preview of the 2016 versions of these teams, and I think over the years we can always look back on things we see in preseason and say we should have known, and we can look back on other things and say, well, maybe we shouldn't have believed what we saw in preseason. But I do think Matt Waldman, his team in the neck of the woods there, Atlanta, is showing us their true selves tonight, and it's beautiful. That third preseason game means the first week of the season's right around the corner, and then it's the roller coaster ride that we love so much.
Yeah, programming note, we will be off next week. For all y'all Denver folks at the Fan Football Fest, you'll see me and Sigmund next Friday, so make sure to stay tuned for that. And it's the fourth week of the preseason. I have every preseason game on tape from the year 2000 until now, except for any Week 4 game. I have 0 Week 4 games in my library. Tell you what, football fans and fantasy football fans, the wait is nearly over. Football is back, which means FanDuel.com is back in this year better than ever. Not just a new season at FanDuel, it's a new era. They've upgraded your entire experience with real improvements for everyday fans. Check it out, FanDuel.com. Special offer for our listeners to this show. New FanDuel.com users will get 1 year Football Guys Insider Pro subscription for free with a $10 deposit. Go to FanDuel.com/FBG. FanDuel.com/FBG. Not only will you get the free subscription, but you'll have that $10 available to play with on FanDuel.com. That's over $40 in value for just $10. FanDuel.com/FBG. Well, let's jump into it with Dr. Gene Bramall tonight. And Dr. Gene, there has been a change in the National Football League to the injury policy. Maybe we can thank or blame Bill Belichick, but now I feel that with the elimination of the designation probable, I feel that everyone under the sun is just going to be questionable, and I believe the number was like 94 or 98% of any player that was probable went ahead and played anyway, so they've eliminated that injury designation. I feel questionable is going to become just everything, so the teams don't get fined in case someone who's not on the injury report doesn't play on Sunday, but they were never questionable. So, like Belichick, maybe everybody's questionable. Dr. Gene, are you questionable? And as I'm rambling, how do fantasy owners look at this new injury designation?
I think they should look forward to it as much as I am, just to see how many players are listed questionable, which I think is the exact opposite of what the NFL had intended. They were hoping to remove the probable designation because it wasn't impacting the injury report in any way anyway. They said 95%. It may have been different than that in past years on average, but in the past couple of years what they had put out is that approximately 95% of the players who was listed probable in prior years, and I don't know how long that period is, did in fact play. So why have the probable tag? However, the other change they made was that in the past, if you were listed as limited or no participation, if you missed any reps in practice, you had to be included on the injury report, and therefore included in the game status report, which is probable, questionable, doubtful, out. And you don't have to be included on the game status report now if you didn't participate in every practice rep. However, it also says pretty clearly if by some chance a player who was not listed on that game status report, that Friday probable questionable and now questionable doubtful, the teams are going to be fined. And this is, set that aside. Teams aren't really going to care so much about being fined, but we've seen Bill Belichick, chiefly among them, as you said, take advantage of this situation in the past and list lots of players questionable. So I think if there's less than 100% chance that a player is going to play on Sunday or Monday night, you're going to see those players listed, and now they can only be listed as questionable. So I suppose there's a chance that there's a scenario where all 32 teams decide on Friday and Saturday that they're not going to list players that they fully expect to play who haven't necessarily practiced during the week. Those players won't be on the injury report, and we'll see fewer and fewer players on the injury report this year. Bill Belichick's got a first-round pick to sell you if you think that's likely to happen. We are going to see exactly what you said. Half the league is going to be listed as questionable. Anybody that has any issue at all is going to end up on the questionable tag, and what we're going to have to figure out is whether or not that player is more likely the probable from last year or truly uncertain to play. And we are going to have to look at the practice participation reports carefully and the trend carefully, and as we have in the past, look and see how players, whether or not they're clear to talk to the media on Friday, and what the tone of all those reports. And I think the Sunday morning updates from Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport and Jay Glazer and so on and so forth are going to be more important than ever. And uncertain means uncertain. So there's going to be multiple situations this year where we're just going to have to throw our hands up and say, let's pay very close attention to what happens in pregame warm-ups between 11:30 inactives and 12:15. Everybody goes back in the locker room to finish getting ready for the game. I don't think that was the plan for this, but I don't know any other way that you would have expected this to go. So you just wonder if maybe this was the NFL giving in to the coaches a little bit, or I'm sure they're all on board with this. So he says sarcastically, I can't wait to see how this goes over the first couple of weeks of the season. But I think this is going to be difficult to navigate in many points this year.
And while you're talking, Gene, Tony Romo, down with back injury.
Oh, no.
Left on his own power, but yeah. Hey, Dak Prescott, come on down. So that we have to talk about Des Bryant's fit. No, we won't do that yet. But I do want to ask you about John Brown. And this is difficult because it sounds like he came back to practice, left with headaches, came back to practice again today, left again. Now we don't know if it's headaches or not. Gene, do you want me to give you some silence for you? Are you watching Tony Romo right now?
You're all right. I'm a pretty good multitasker. Go ahead.
I'm not, so I just wanted to make sure. So,
but that's exactly what I'm doing.
Yeah, so the point here is this. We don't know for sure if John Brown left practice today because of headaches, but we've already had him try to come back and leave because of headaches once. It's hard to quantify this, Gene. But roughly how much you think in terms of tiers like I do? Are we moving John Brown down a tier? Are we moving John Brown down 2 tiers? Are we almost looking at him at this point as somebody that we'd only draft as a bench player because we can't count on him? And of course, this is going to affect J.J. Nelson. This is going to affect John Brown. Of course, Michael Floyd and Larry Fitzgerald, who we could have another conversation about with his minor MCL sprain. But Brown, headaches, the headache for us, and obviously hopes that he gets well and gets back on the field.
Well, I think it was, in the first place, very reassuring that they allowed him to come back out and do individual drills today. That was suggestive that they weren't convinced that the headache was because he came back to light work and practice the day before and had recurrent symptoms. The fact that they started him somewhere in the middle of the return to play protocol, if they put him in it at all, was important. Him leaving the field with the trainer is worrisome. It may mean nothing. It could be totally unrelated to what was going on yesterday with headache concern and in previous weeks with his return to play from concussion. But at this point, I don't know how that you can go into a draft this weekend thinking that's the case. Hopefully we get some information from Arizona that better defines what symptoms he has and what their level of concern is. But at this point, if he went 3 weeks recovering from a recent concussion, did not make it 24 hours, and then 48 hours without recurrent symptoms, you have to put him in that indefinite category. And we're not going to go to the Javad Best or even the Ladarius Green version of concussion events at this point, but I think what I wrote in my article last night was his ADP looks like wide receiver 3 right now. So it's a little bit risky in that range. I think as this new news gets baked in, he's going to drop at least around maybe 3 or 4. if it's proven that this is the case, and I don't think you can make any sort of investment in John Brown right now unless you are certain that you're going to get other players in a redraft league that can cover for you in case there's an issue here. Way too early to say whether or not we're talking about injured reserve or prolonged absence or anything like that. But if this is return to play concussion protocol at this point and his previous recovery took 3 weeks, they are going to be just as cautious with him this time. And we talked last week that 2 to 3 week return may have just been more caution than what they would have done in the regular season, and maybe he returned to practice within the middle of the week and played the following week. But now that we know that he did get 3 weeks and possibly did have a setback, if those two things are accurate, that he needed 3 weeks to recover and had a setback so quickly, who knows when he comes back. And hopefully we see him back on the field this weekend and there's no issue and we're getting ready for week 1. But at this point, you got to be very, very wary of John Brown.
Gene, why does Matt Forte make you nervous?
Because I think he had an aggravation. I think it's putting the tea leaves together. It really sounds like he had a hamstring strain coming into camp, took one practice and very few reps and could not go. So either it was a higher grade injury than they expected in the beginning that required 4 to 6 weeks to recover, or it was an injury that was then aggravated to something that required 2 to 3 weeks to recover. Either way, it's not a great situation when you have a higher grade injury or an aggravation through the preseason for any running back, even a veteran that's on the older side, like Forte, to come back effectively. So I think the plan is for him to participate this week. If he does so and makes it through consecutive practices the following week, then we're probably fine. But he's got to do that in order to feel comfortable that we're not on the verge of another cascade or reconditioning situation leading into the first week of the season.
It is the Audible Live each and every Thursday night, and Dr. Gene will be going through some preseason players, preseason stars, and one of them that had some nice plays, of course, is Jeremy Langford, but with a foot injury now. What is the latest that we know on Langford? He says he's getting better and he's feeling better. Any concern here?
I don't think so. My game rewind was giving me all sorts of trouble, so it took me a couple extra days, but I finally got a look at it today. There really wasn't much to see in his last 3 or 4 plays where there looked like there was a mechanised injury. He sort of banged. It looked like he got banged up, maybe stepped on, maybe collided knees with somebody else on his touchdown run. But in the plays leading up to that, there really wasn't. You just couldn't really tell that there was anything going on. It's really hard to say what 1 day worth in a boot means, and then he came out, and then he's getting close to get back to practice. So injury mechanism is unclear. It's John Fox in Chicago. We're not going to get any meaningful information, so we're entirely reliant on how soon he comes back to practice and how quickly he takes consecutive practices. It doesn't sound like a significant situation, but it's something that we've got to watch until we have a better sense of exactly where we are.
So, Gene, they're saying Romo's throwing passes on the sideline.
Yeah, it looks like he got folded in half.
Yeah.
From what I can tell here. So he's had herniated discs. He's had transverse process fractures. He's had pretty significant bruises in that area as well. And I'm trying to rewind quickly enough and stop. I need to put this on slow motion here probably to get a closer look at it. But I can't tell whether or not it was just that he got folded or whether or not the guy got him with the knee behind. He almost had to have gotten a knee the way he walked off, the way they were examining and putting the hand up underneath that big flak jacket that he's got there. That it must have been the defender that got him on the way by. So the concern here is that he's got a recurrence of one of the injuries he had in the past, and that's much more likely to be one of those back fractures than anything else. But him having been through this before, you can possibly see why he was maybe a little bit more concerned about a minor situation. So I don't know that we're going to see him back on the field. I'm not watching anything live here right now, but hopefully this isn't a long-term situation. And even those back fractures that he had previously didn't turn into a multi-week situation. So, well, let's just preach some caution on this for now, and I'll take a closer look at that as we continue to talk.
Well, I'll just say, because I'm watching Dane Brugler and a bunch of other people tweeted good vines of the play, and at this point, I don't know about y'all, and Gene, I'm just taking your segment over here and riffing extemporaneously, but
Go for it.
But out of the 32 quarterbacks this year, even more than Robert Griffin III, I felt if you were to say who's the most likely quarterback to get hurt, it's not just the balsa wood, styrofoam, collarbone. It's just the way that Tony Romo moves and the way that he takes hits. He was trying to run downfield. He took a hit sort of from behind, from the side, but you can see his body just kind of fold, like you said, it folds his body down. He takes hits like an old quarterback now.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a
Adams
reverse angle on this at some point. From this first angle, it doesn't really look like he got hit much from behind. It really looks like he got folded instead of a direct blow, which is, I mean, that brings herniated disc, that brings degenerative changes that he's had in the past, that brings all those things back on the table. And he had a facet joint surgery at some point too with that cyst there. Let's just see how this develops. If he's up and moving around as he always does,
moving around,
maybe,
like he's got his helmet on, he wants to go back in the game. I'm sure he's fine right now, but I just think watching him take this hit, if you're out there listening, it'll just remind you why we think of Tony Romo as a quarterback who's probably got an expiration date on him at some point, and why, hey, Dak Prescott, and you think about that if you're drafting Elliott or Bryant. Anyway, let's get back to Dr. Gene, but this is obviously something really important for Dr. Gene. We're looking at these players right now coming in. Let's say Ezekiel Elliott, Romo stuff aside, let's say Ezekiel Elliott gets through this game without incident. After he missed most of the preseason still with a hamstring injury, and he's a rookie, is this one of those things that makes you say first-round pick is just a little too much faith when we have that blemish on his preseason to this point?
No, I don't think so. And I think what Stephania Bell got from Jason Garrett a couple of weeks ago, saying that they just wanted to make absolutely sure that a short-term situation didn't turn into a long-term situation, is probably accurate at this point. I think, as we've said about so many other players, pup-less, not pup-less, this is the week where players need to get on the field, start reconditioning, and prove that they're ready. They don't have to do a lot, but they have to at least be on the field. That was the concern with Dion Lewis all along. That was the concern with all these guys, Charles, Nelson, Rawls, all of these players, and everyone but Lewis came back, including Elliott. Elliott did some resistance work, and then they let him do a little bit more, and he progressed, and he was allowed to play today. And again, I'm not watching specifically, but I haven't heard anything or seen anything on Twitter that makes me think that he's doesn't look healthy there, and he certainly played more than a few snaps here. So I think he's going to be good to go. If he doesn't have any issues coming out of this game and practice as well this week, I think we can assume that he's very close to putting that hamstring strain behind him.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that Tony Romo got in one of those Old Spice commercials that had come out where they switch bodies and Adam Sandler was on the other side, because he's looking more and more like Adam Sandler in a Cowboys uniform right now.
Me play football?
Yes, exactly. Smell like a boss. So that's what he's wanting to do, I guess. But looking at one of the players that's interesting to me is Dion Lewis. Jason Wood was saying during one of the drafts we had the other night, having a debate with somebody during the draft, that there's thought that he may never even be the same once he comes back. How much are you concerned about that with Dion Lewis and his injury?
I'm going to continue to punt on Dion Lewis until we get more information. I think there's more going on than what we heard. And here's why. 8 to 10 weeks doesn't make a whole lot. At least clean-out procedure and 8 to 10 weeks doesn't make sense unless you are already baking in 6 weeks at minimum on in-season pup into that recovery timetable, because then you can add the 2 weeks for recovery from whatever surgery he's about to have to the 6 weeks of in-season pup to the potential 2 weeks in practice before he needs to be activated, and then you get to 8 to 10 weeks. But I can't think of an arthroscopic knee surgery where a player would be given a timetable of 8 to 10 weeks. If it was a meniscus injury that gets trimmed up, that's 2 to 4. Sometimes a little bit longer. If it's a meniscus injury where it's repaired and sewed back together, it's 3 to 4 months, sometimes 4 to 6 months. If it's more than that, if it's a cartilage injury where they're just taking out loose bodies, it's probably 2 to 4 weeks, like the meniscus trim-up procedure. If it's microfracture, we know it's going to be a lot longer than that. If the concern is that his ACL graft is no longer stable, it's going to be usually much longer than 8 to 10 weeks, because as we've seen with Brashad Perriman, the ligament has to be allowed to heal, and then they have to rehab. Why are we having arthroscopic surgery to look at a PCL or a severe? I don't know. Those things, if they're repaired surgically, take much longer. If not, they generally don't take as long. So I don't get to 8 to 10 weeks that we heard from Tom Curran. Adam Schefter and a few others said indefinite. That makes much more sense to me, as does the fact that we've heard nothing about what this particular injury may be. So what I'm speculating is probably going on here is that they're worried about something, but they don't know exactly what it is, and they haven't decided and won't decide, the surgeon won't, until they're in there and looking at it, how they want to approach the injury. So maybe they trim, maybe they sew, maybe they microfracture, maybe they don't. Maybe the ACL is fine, maybe it isn't. Without knowing specifically what they're going in there to look at and decide what to do, it's impossible to say, is this a very short-term thing? Is this pup and he's going to come off immediately? Or is this injured reserve where he may or may not be able to come off at any point? Or is it something like a microfracture surgery that could endanger his career? And without having those little bits of information, anything other than 8 to 10 weeks might have made a little bit of sense to me, but it's really hard for me to say, yeah, I think this is what's going on with that number there, because really and truly, unless it's somebody has told Tom Curran, this is a minor thing, we're going to put him on PUP, there's no chance he'll be back for 8 to 10 weeks, that number doesn't make sense as far as a rehab timetable. So
well, maybe it's a good idea that if you're in Vegas, that if Bill Belichick happens to be there and says you want to come back to his hotel room for an interview and talk football, maybe you say no because you don't want to wake up in a bathtub with an ice bag over your knee.
Yeah, so this is stay tuned for sure on Lewis, and I'll, as soon as we get anything, any sort of, another little blip in the in the matrix here, we'll have something more to go on. But it's been 3 days, 3 or 4 days, and we still don't know when he's going to have surgery, and nothing. It's been radio silence over the past 48 hours about this at all. So hopefully we'll hear on the day that he has the surgery, we'll get a better timetable, or at least we'll get an indication of what the concern is here, because by all accounts he looked great in OTAs. So something's up here, and the implication is that it's not good because he's not been through the locker room. But it's kind of interesting when we hear he's walking through without a limp, and then 10 minutes later, unnamed sources are saying that he needs surgery and go from there. So the day he shows up, it was clear that this was information that was going to get released that day. Hopefully we know more soon.
Yeah, things changed real quickly around the NFL. On Saturday, I did the Fantasy Sports Combine here in Denver. Adam Schefter was here, and we were doing a live mock draft with the fans, and Dion Lewis was on the board, and I kept pressing Adam, like, what's going on? And he was giving me the thumbs up. I never said this. I texted Bloom about it. I was like, Schefter's giving me the thumbs up on Dion Lewis. And then, lo and behold, what was it, like 12 hours later, Bloom? Like, Adam did some digging and obviously had found that. But before that, this is where, new information versus old information, or just the information that we're working on in the PR game that is covering the NFL at that level. You're told oftentimes, it's okay, until you press. And then, oh, yeah, well, this really needs a surgery. So it's interesting that how that all changed within, like, the course of half a day, where it's like, I guess he's okay. Adam says he's taking him in the 5th round of every single one of his drafts, and now who knows when Dion Lewis will be back. We'll get back on that when we get to the news section of the program. Dr. Gene, looks like we can go around the horn one more time with you, and I want to ask you about, and go defensive, by the way, IDP Roundtable up. Thank you, fellas, for doing that. Defensive question, because I talked to DeMarcus Ware yesterday. He said that he was at 70% healthy in the Super Bowl when he was pretty damn good. Now he winks and says he's at 94% healthy, off the PUP list, back in practice, doing some teamwork, mostly just walkthrough stuff this week in preparation for the Rams. Is this something where we may see a little bit more from Ware? I know a lot of IDP owners thinking about that Denver pass rush and who's going to be opposite Miller. Shane Ray's looked awesome. Shaq Barrett is a playmaker, but DeMarcus Ware still play more than a couple hundred snaps, which is what I was expecting.
I think as much as they can get him on the field would make sense. I'm still kind of, I don't know what we're going to get out of Shane Ray. Shaq Barrett has definitely looked good. It's always nice to have as many pass rushers as you can get, but with Derek Wolfe getting over what he's getting over and the loss of Malik Jackson, Wade Phillips can be as creative as he wants to with the pass rushers that he has, and I don't think we're going to see DeMarcus Ware play on a whole lot of snaps, But yeah, I think more than 200 now that he seems like he's getting closer to a full recovery from the back issues that have plagued him off and on for so long. Just makes sense to get him on the field because when he's healthy enough to be productive, he's been exactly that. So, are we going to see him for 800 snaps? Probably not, but definitely more than 200. I think somewhere in that 500 range, that situational pass rusher role makes a lot of sense, and I think the Broncos can work around the base defense a little bit differently.
Gene, let's talk Tyler Eifert. And just we don't really know much more than we knew, other than the additional piece of information of the surgery being on the inside of his knee. But you still have a good feel. We don't know the number of weeks he'll be out, but we know what we have when he gets back, assuming he gets back and gets up to speed without incident. Based on his current ADP, I think you can get him around the 7th round. Is that something that, based on what we know, you think could be a move that works out for people?
I think so, if he doesn't rush back. So what we've seen with players with these ankle injuries, regardless of what it may be, is it takes them a little bit longer than they expect to fully feel healthy enough to do what they would ordinarily do on the field. And the players that come back on the early part of their timeline tend to not be themselves a little bit longer than players that come back on the other end of the timeline. And I still don't, I think I'm pretty comfortable saying we're not going to see him in week 1. But as we progress here, it looks a little bit less likely that we're going to see him stay on PUP list to start the season. But when you hear we're still optimistic about week 1 this week, he's just starting to jog. And as we've said, all of the rehab protocols from Dr. Anderson on this particular surgery, or surgeries like it, are that this phase where they clear him to run and get his functional strength and range of motion back is almost as long as allowing the ligament to heal itself, which is an 8 to 10 week process. So just now starting to jog, I don't see any way they clear him for contact in less than 3 weeks for week 1. I think there's a good chance that he starts the season on the active roster. Does that mean he's back in week 2, week 4, week 5? It's hard to say. But I sort of like what we said with Arian Foster last year, that, the more that a player with the type of injuries that they had, and Eifert's ankle injury is included in that, the more time he gives himself to make sure that that he's fully back and that the range of motion and strength is there, the better he's going to play. He's a dominant player, but he still needs to get off the line well. He still needs to get in to linebackers and safeties and separate. And part of the crux of the number of touchdowns he scored last year were those seam routes and end zone routes where he's not just catching the ball into his body and falling into the end zone. He is getting up in the air and making plays at the high point of the catch. And if his ankle isn't ready to do that, then we are not going to see what we saw from him last year, which was going to be difficult to repeat anyway, just based on the percentage of times he was thrown to and the percentage of times he converted those throws. So I would feel better about him if we knew that he wasn't likely to be back until week 3 or week 4. If he comes back in week 1, it's going to be the Jimmy Graham, Calvin Johnson situation where, he's there in high leverage situations, maybe plays 15 to 30 snaps. You hope he gets 3 to 4 targets. And we'll talk about that in week 1 if that's what it comes up to be. But I think we're still a month away from seeing Tyler Eifert in any meaningful capacity on the field.
Gene, I know this is a dangerous question because I can hear my wife already shouting from downstairs, but kids don't have Achilles tendons. But I do have to ask you about our favorite player, Steve Smith. And I just am curious as to how a player whose leg was described as ground chuck is now suddenly looks like a fillet or a ribeye in the counter in the grocery store. How does it go from that to the other? And how does a player work at it to be able to take it from that level to actually functional enough to play professional football again?
I think there's 2 reasons. One is give his surgeon 50 gold stars for surmounting the technical challenge of sewing together raw shredded chicken in multiple places and doing so in such a way that Steve Smith was able to do what he does, which is aggressively rehab to the point of vomit so that he can, a player that was planning to be retired right now, recover to show that he can get over this injury and he can retire on his own terms. Both of those folks, if this gets pulled off, it's going to be a minor medical miracle and a hugely successful rehab situation for Steve Smith. He's not there yet. Everything has been positive. It's beyond impressive that he came off PUP and passed a physical to the extent where the team doesn't have any worries that they were going to have to keep him on in-season PUP. It's just amazing. That doesn't mean he's going to be ready for Week 1 in any, same as Eifert in a meaningful capacity. But I think this is a dramatic situation that hopefully, if Smith pulls it off, gets shouted from the rooftops when it happens.
Can you explain the level of pain tolerance he must have to be able to do this compared to, say, other injuries like ACL injuries or patella tendon injuries? I mean, what's the comparison here?
I mean, I think there's a level of pain tolerance and a mental fortitude that's necessary to rehab any of these injuries to the point where you go back out and play at the very highest level anywhere near the form you were pre-injury. But you just take your finger and run it down the back of your calf to your ankle there and feel the size of that tendon, feel how little tissue there is around there, recognize how much weight gets put on that area, understand when you get up on your toes what that Achilles tendon is doing for you. I get nervous when I go down the steps backwards that I'm going to have, if I take one step backwards when my boys are running around the steps next to me, that one of mine is going to go, and it's just every bit of an 8 to 9 month situation. It's significant, and it's one thing if you have an area where it's just ruptured in one place and you can reapproximate the edges. And just think about if you took a piece of thread or you took a piece of yarn and you cut it once and then you cut it in another spot and then you frayed it out a little bit to try to put it back together the way it was before you did that, and then to have it hold up afterwards. This is a big deal. I mean, it's like that for all Achilles tendons. That's why the patellar tendon is such a tough situation. It's a little bit tougher situation because you'll lose every last little bit of strength in your quad muscle, and you have to build all that up. That's not quite the same thing that happens with an Achilles injury because those players are allowed to rehab and get range of motion back right away. That doesn't happen with the patellar tendon. So that's probably a more difficult injury to recover from. But as we talked about last week and multiple times, with an ACL, you just take the ACL out and put a graft in, and it's known pretty well right now where to anchor the graft and about how tight to make that ACL graft, and we see almost every player return. It's technically difficult to decide just how to do that with the Achilles tendon and the other tendons, and it's that much more technically difficult if that injury has been accurately described. It's absolutely painful trying to rehab that. I mean, just think about having that tied together, that small area, how much weight that bears, and then to start rehabbing the next day. Yeah, that's nothing that any of us want.
So you're saying that if Roger Goodell decided that he was going to try and institute physical torture to get answers out of players, that the players
that's a decent place to start.
Steve Smith would be the guy that they would put up there just in case because they think he could probably handle it. Okay.
But how would he come back from gout? That's a wrap for Dr. Gene Brammel's segment. Dr. Gene, you're going to hang out with us? Or you got to run, buddy?
I think I'm going to run tonight. I'm going to keep you guys on in the background while I do a little bit extra work here. If I hear anything exciting, I'll appear on the bottom of your screen again.
You'll tap in. Tag team back again. Namaste to you, good sir. He's Dr.
Thanks,
Gene
gentlemen.
Brammel, footballguys.com, at Gene Brammel on Twitter. Sigmund Bloom, let's get a game update. We got two.
Sure. Yeah, we do. Watching the Atlanta-Miami game, Atlanta's offensive line didn't look good. Freeman and Coleman basically got equal work, which if you're Devontae Freeman, targeting drafter in the second round, not happy. You shouldn't be happy about that. Freeman looked better than Coleman. Coleman still looked exactly like the player we evaluated, Mr. Waldman. Just very awkward, changing direction, basically can go in straight lines pretty well, but it's not going to translate that well. Freeman translating better, but overall the offense, especially once Julio Jones went out, just looked really flat. And I just think that you see Atlanta being an underachieving offensive team again this year, basically across the board. Miami was much more interesting in that we saw Kenny Stills shake things up a little bit here, where Kenny Stills, much like he was with the New Orleans, when he was coming on early in his career with New Orleans, you saw him making deep separation pretty easily, having enough speed to get defensive backs to play him on their heels instead of their toes, and then having good synchronicity with his quarterback. And that's what was happening tonight, especially in that 10 to 15-yard zone. It seemed like he and Ryan Tannehill were on the same page. Tannehill looked comfortable in the hurry-up offense, and then as Adam Gase usually does, leaving a running back in for a whole series.
2 weeks in a row, too.
Yeah, leaving the running backs in for the whole series. Ajayi comes in first, and again, Matt, I'm always harkening back to the when we talk about players, Ajayi looking kind of like the wild horse out there. Sometimes getting himself into the corner of the pen and not having anywhere to go. Sometimes all arms and legs getting through a tackle around somebody. But Miami's offensive line not exactly looking great in the run game at all. Arian Foster was bottled up even easier than Ajayi, but he did look pretty solid always as a receiver, even after the catch. He had a touchdown catch. And also, the offense looked better when Foster was in. The offense just functioned better when Foster was in.
He had a good run for a TD. That was a nice cutback.
I'm sorry. His run for the touchdown was classic Foster, where he got around and then got his body north-south and got in easily. So you're right. The touchdown run was classic Foster. But I'm looking at these games, and Devontae Parker was only involved to the extent of having two screens and didn't look very dynamic on those screens. And that's not how you would use Devontae Parker anyway. That's not Devontae Parker's game. Jarvis Landry looks like Jarvis Landry. Jordan Cameron looks terrible. Jordan Cameron looks like a guy. I mean, he's so lucky they only gave him a pay cut to $6 million. They should have just basically gave him an offer like what Victor Cruz got, even though he's not coming off a catastrophic injury. Jordan Cameron looked. I don't know what happened to him. It's another classic Robert De Niro used to be beautiful moment because he doesn't look sharp out there at all. There was some stuff to mine there, but I'm not that excited about Atlanta, and I'm looking at Devontae Parker, like really just moving him out of the range where you would draft him.
No, you flip-flop him with Stills probably at the end of the year. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, and Stills has been a guy that's jumped out this preseason as we change narratives through the preseason. I've made no mystery that I am in love with Adam Gase, and Ryan Tannehill is my second quarterback. Jarvis Landry is one of my wide receivers I lean on every week, playing that Demaryius Thomas X. And Parker, the wide receiver screens are not Parker's game, Bloom, but it's Adam Gase, and he's gonna try to craft that in a similar way as what he did with Emmanuel Sanders. But Kenny Stills is the guy. He's one of the players that I've written down on our news segment we'll go through. Kenny Stills has been coming through not just tonight, but this entire preseason.
Multiple third downs. That's where Tannehill looks on third down is Stills.
Yeah. So in the Dallas-Seattle game, we've already covered a lot of it. Tony Romo, and I don't want to appeal to this sort of squishy kind of narrative, but you just watch the way he moves and the way he takes a hit, and you just know that it's a matter of time. It really is just a matter of time with him. Ezekiel Elliott looking good, getting the corner easy, getting north-south, delivering the blow at the end of the runs, and lots of room to run. And I think that even if Tony Romo misses time, Dak Prescott, especially for the running game, they're giving him some some run-pass type options. I think Ezekiel Elliott could be just fine. And I've said on Twitter today, by the way, that I have a lot of remorse that I didn't immediately move Alfred Morris up whenever Darren McFadden's elbow injury happened. There's some talk that because of the numbers game among the Dallas running backs, Lance Dunbar, all the hoopla, it was activated. And they're going to use Lance Dunbar. I mean, I don't think it's enough to change Ezekiel Elliott's stock. Elliott might lose some receptions to him, some third down snaps to him, but Dunbar will help this offense stay on the field. Darius Jackson, the seventh rounder, spark freak, they like him, so why not just leave Darren McFadden on the PUP list? See if you can find a trade partner. You don't rush him back. You still have 4 running backs active. Alfred Morris looks like he's the handcuff to Ezekiel Elliott, and behind this offensive line, I was writing about Morris today, and I said he's a running back's running back. He runs through contact like he barely even notices it. He's a very efficient runner, very rugged style, and he'll flourish in this offense, I think, in the zone. And they still can probably execute zone. They're maybe a little better as a zone offensive line than power. They can do both very well. So Dallas is what you see, was what you get. Jason Witten stole an interception off the back of a defender or off the defender's body for a touchdown from Prescott. And I think that that's getting to see Ezekiel Elliott tonight. Anybody who is on the fence thinking about taking him in the first round, I think what you saw tonight, both the room he had to run and how dynamic he looked, it's what you were looking for, even though we hadn't seen him yet this preseason.
Alfred Morris, no nonsense.
Yeah.
I always think of that. Like, he's not going to mess around. He's not going to dance. He's going to take it and go and look good when he does it. Let's stick on the Cowboys since I have Dak Prescott written down as one of the players I want to toss around between us three. And, Matt, I'll start with you because we saw Dak Prescott at the Senior Bowl. I had an eye on him, especially because I knew the Broncos had liked him, and they had felt if they didn't get Paxton Lynch, they were going to take Dak Prescott. We see now, and I watched all of his throws last night. Again, I went through a compilation of all of his preseason throws, and what you see is They're keeping it somewhat simple, reading one side of the field, making either just one read or a couple of reads really quickly. That athleticism is there to extend the play. Like everything that we saw, there were so many misconceptions about Dak Prescott, Matt, it kind of pissed me off because people would see 15 in the SEC running for his life and go, oh, Tim Tebow. I heard people toss that name out at the Senior Bowl. Maybe not people that I respect. The offensive line of Mississippi State never did him any good, and they never helped him at all. I've always seen a little Donovan McNabb to his game. Now that we've seen him with the Cowboys, now that we know Tony Romo, we already knew it, but now we see it again. Like, okay, yeah, it's Romo. He's going to get hurt. Thoughts on Dak Prescott, everything we've seen, and I love the aggressive mindset, Matt, as a passer when he's given a high-low read, as, again, they're keeping it simple to one side of the field. He's taking the high. He's liking that high, man. He's liking to attack vertically, and I like seeing that from the young quarterback.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway that you would have with Dak Prescott is that he hasn't screwed up a simple concept or simple way of the game, and that makes it sound like, oh, he's not very good. Oh, I'm being condescending of it. And no, the answer to the question really is that take any rookie quarterback and put him in his first series of preseason games, and he's going to screw up things that are rather easy early on because there's a lot of new concepts going on for them. And you have to understand, I mean, I studied that as well, and I totally concur that a lot of plays, they only sent 2 receivers out. A lot of plays, there were a number of plays where there was only one safety in the secondary, and he was on the opposite hash, outside the opposite hash. It was like a big neon sign going, go to this receiver right here and throw the fade. What he didn't do are the things that I still have questions about. It's things that Dallas said, look, we know, my estimation of this is that Dallas says, we know what he can't do yet. We know what he's got to work on. And what he's got to work on is integrating all the separate things that he does really well. Like if you take all of his skills in a vacuum and say, climbs the pocket, mobile quarterback, big arm, capable of throwing into a tight window, capable of throwing someone open on the move, improviser, he probably gets an A on all those things. Then join those simple sentences together into compound sentences and ask him to combine all those things, and he probably gets a C- or a D on a lot of them right now. And that was the biggest issue I always had him, because, see, here's the thing about quarterbacking that a lot of people don't understand, is that quarterbacking has gotten better and better in terms of, and this is something I talked to with a coach this week, is that from an instructional standpoint, quarterbacks are more and more technically sound as they enter college and the NFL than ever. The advent of what we do with online technology and the ability to communicate with people and see good technique and do all those things are all there. It's just like music teachers who can do lessons online. You want to take you want to listen to somebody or work with somebody who plays with a top 40 group or plays with a bunch of different great musicians. You can take lessons from them now in Colorado when you're living in Georgia. But the thing is despite knowing all the good licks and knowing all the good lines and maybe having a good sound, it's just like quarterback. You may have the good arm, you may have the good form, you may understand what the coverages look like, but you still have to make music when you get on stage, and it still has to sound musical. And with quarterbacking, the problem is we look at Dak Prescott, and he really is playing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star right now. And he's playing it really well. And Dallas, to their credit, is doing some variations on Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star that is making him do well. And if you've got Ezekiel Elliott throwing down the baseline to make it funky, and the rest of that rhythm section of the Cowboys offensive line to make it sound great, he can be a little out of tune. He may not have to do any of the difficult things. He's still going to do well with the things I ask him to do. Meanwhile, a guy like Jared Goff, he's going from an air raid offense, which is Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star in a lot of ways, throw to open grass, and they're asking him to play Mahler. Okay, they're asking him to conduct a Mahler symphony with a West Coast-based offense, which is like learning basic English, and now you have to learn advanced Chinese, and that's why he looks lost. And I have no idea why Bucky Brooks is so surprised about that, other than that he's a wide receiver and maybe he doesn't think about quarterbacking on that level. in the way that he is, or it's just good press to be able to talk about how surprised he is that Jared Goff looks lost. But Dak Prescott deserves credit for being good at what he's doing, but we have to wait for him to do complex things and wait for the defenses to go, okay, we've seen what he can do. Let's test him on what he can't. And when he does that, then I'd be like, wow, if he does that. But right now, not there.
Still playing the recorder. Bloom, thoughts on a rushing quarterback, which is always interesting for fans.
Right. Well, I'm still getting this picture of like being at a jazz club, a smoky jazz club, and the rhythm section comes out, and then, they're laying it down, and then Dak Prescott comes out with a saxophone, and plays "Twinkle Twinkle Little Star" over that.
And he's playing in tune, and he's playing in time. That's good. He just ain't doing anything.
And look, Dallas with their offensive line and their running game. You're going to go into the week as a defensive coordinator saying, we have to stop this. I mean, whether we win this game or not is going to depend on whether we can solve their running game. And because of that, having Dak Prescott, as you said, Matt, with a few twists, a few variations, but giving him simple things to do, can work just fine for this year. Just fine. Especially with guys like Des Bryant. So Des Bryant, being back to Des Bryant, can also make some silly decisions look good. So it can work just fine for this year. The long-term arc of Dak Prescott, though, we have to be more open to. And I do think, and this goes back to Eric Stoner, and I'd love, by the way, I'll give a shout-out to Eric Stoner, because he's giving fantasy football takes now. So if you're not following at Bo Jackson, you got to. We were going back and forth on Fleener. He said keep letting the dorks take Fleener. Because anyway, I love Eric Stoner. I love so many people in our football world. But,
Keep the bottle on the shelf.
Yeah, well, I think that with Dak Prescott, there's a reminder here that he elevated a program, that he took a Mississippi State program and put them among the elite in college football, in the SEC, and that means something. And I think there's a connection between that and what we're seeing, how he just looks comfortable. He's comfortable on a football field. Whatever Matt, you talked about like looking at him atomically or isolating things, but you just see that on a football field he's not overwhelmed. The game's not too big for him. And I think with the strengths of this team, if Romo goes down, or like the case I was making when Romo goes down, I think he'll be ready for what he has. I think you'll see him do better, say, than whoever Denver puts out at quarterback this year, and whoever Philadelphia puts out at quarterback this year. And
except for Paxton Lynch.
We'll see, and that's who Dallas wanted.
Lynch is going to play, and Lynch and Prescott are going to go back and forth. This is the next. I don't want to say it's Brady Manning, because it's not, but it's not Goff and Wentz. It's Prescott and Lynch, because Denver took Lynch. They thought they might get Prescott if they didn't get Lynch. Dallas wanted Lynch, didn't get him, and then they get Prescott. So that's something to watch, and I believe Lynch is going to see the field in Week 5 against Atlanta. Moving on from that, gentlemen, well, let's talk about Jimmy Garoppolo, because going through watching all of his preseason passes last night, Matt, and in a row, just, boom, pass from Garoppolo. Belichick can cover up a lot of blemishes. And, those first 4 games, whatever, and Bloom, I'm going to ask you about the New England running backs without Lewis and all that. We're going to get into all that. But, Matt, just going back and thinking about our trip and conversations about Jimmy Garoppolo, one of those players I got to see both at the Shrine Game and at the Senior Bowl, re-evaluating, going back over what's the book on him. He's afraid of his own shadow. He really still has those happy feet. You still see that nervousness, Matt. I don't know if his palms get real sweaty, but you see a nervous pocket passer who loves to throw quick into the outside. Still got that super quick release. So for me, Matt, and again, Belichick and the game plan and Patriots and blah, 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 that can cover up some things. But just from an evaluation standpoint, looking at Jimmy Garoppolo, I don't see much that has changed. He was going over the middle a little bit more comfortably sometimes, but you still saw him nervous, feet, patter, and not in a Peyton Manning like you knew where he was going to go, but in a nervous like, gotta get rid of the ball, and those nervous feet and the patting the ball and, still got the quick release, that's fine. I just don't see a different Garoppolo, not that much compared to what we saw in college, at Eastern Illinois, and on the All-Star road trip. Matt, your thoughts?
One major thing that I have seen him improve on is that he's not as frequently turtling when pressure comes near him. And that was something that was a big problem with him at Eastern Illinois, is that he would literally just, his shoulders and head would just go down, and he would Jeff George it at times. And it was just something that happened instantaneously. And I'm much relieved for his sake that he is not turtling it nearly as often on plays, and ones where he is, it's pretty understandable. That quick trigger, I think, is the problem. That's the blessing and curse, is that players who have that quick release, oftentimes too, when they get in a situation where there's a little bit of trouble and they are a little on the nervous side, they guess where they're throwing the ball. And if you don't know if where you're throwing is open, you shouldn't be throwing the football. And he's had some instances at least this past week, where it seemed like that he was kind of like, I think the receiver's going to be open over here. Let me throw it there, and rather than I know this receiver is open here. So that's going to be somewhat of the problem. But at the same time, the bigger question will probably be, if he's got Gronkowski running wide open in the middle of the field, if he's got Martellus Bennett running wide open in the middle of the field, he's got Welker, he may have some opportunities to make some really easy throws paired with a running back in LeGarrette Blount, who is, always compared pejoratively to bad players, and always tends to be much better than that. You and I were giggling in the Senior Bowl watching him when they seemed to put him in the corner because, he made that dunce cap move against the Boise State player and decided they were going to punish him collectively. And then we just sit there and watch him occasionally get a look and be the best running back on the field. And we would just laugh at it because it was just like people would go, ooh, who is that? Who's that 250-pound man moving like that, And so I think that there's a chance for him to keep them 2-2, or maybe win a game, maybe and even if they go 0-4 to start it off, I don't really care, because the Patriots are going to be fine with even if they go 0-4 and everyone says the sky's falling, because this is probably one of the best organizations in football that can handle it.
Brady will come back and crush everyone and hear the lamentations of the women, just like Conan did by Crombloom. What do you think about Garoppolo and this Pats offense? Let's talk Dion Lewis. Let's talk everything here.
Yeah. I know Dion Lewis, and it's hard for me to give it up. And, listening to Dr. Gene, it's sobering, because I still saw Lewis in classic 20-man roster, 12-man PPR worth stashing, because you know what you're going to get when he comes back, unlike other waiver wire pickups that you're foregoing to hold him. But it's sobering. And even James White, he was the receiving back at a time whenever things weren't looking good for the offense. They had to go to more rudimentary things because the offensive line and Julian Edelman were out. But still, White could give us some flex level plays, maybe White in the 13th, 14th, 15th round if you don't like your depth. And I still would prefer Sproles to White probably, but they're close to each other. Blunt would be the guy here, and you play him whenever you like the matchup for the running game. And I think Garoppolo can be fine. And I actually think that if you're really get caught, you take Brady, you get caught on the other side of some quarterback 2 runs, and you have to start Garoppolo, it might not be terrible, just because they've got Gronk, they've got Bennett, they've got, of course, Edelman, Hogan, we'll see about Amendola, James White out of the backfield. And I do think Belichick will stay true to exploiting the matchups. And I look at Arizona, Miami, Houston, Buffalo in those first 4 games for Garoppolo, and I think you're not going to run at Buffalo's front. By game 3, if Watt's back, you're not going to run at Watt. You're not going to run at Miami's front. You're not going to run at Ndamukong Suh and Jordan Phillips. Maybe Arizona, but Arizona can score enough points that you're not going to be able to slow the game down. So I think that Garoppolo can make a lot of short, accurate, high percentage passes. Gronk, Bennett, Edelman getting open early in routes, White out of the backfield. I think that he can be fine. I think that this offense can be fine, but it does make me sad to contemplate maybe not getting to see Dion Lewis play this year.
Jadeveon Clowney with multiple pass rush moves, I think he's going to be needing some Pampers.
Yeah, well, get the ball out quick. 1, 2, 3, get it out. 1, 2, 3, get it out. And the thing is, they have enough of these guys, Gronk and Bennett and Edelman and White then leaking out of the backfield, that as long as he has in his head what his options are and he blocks that out, Clowney and Watt and so on, then he can make it. But I think you all have set up frame very well what the internal struggle will be for Garoppolo.
Yeah, I'm squatting on every short route. If I'm a defense, I'm saying let's line up everybody within 7 yards of the line of scrimmage, because this guy's not going to have enough time to throw, and this guy's not going to challenge us vertically. So it'll be interesting to see, that's for sure. And see, I trust in Belichick to get the most out of whatever that he's got. Audible Live, let's do a couple more topics, fellas. I want to pick your brain about the following. And again, preseason narratives, we have, like pre-training camp narratives. Then we get to preseason, and now we have new narratives. One of those is the backup running back situation in Indianapolis. Reporters now saying, well, it's Robert Turbin. We've seen Josh Ferguson. It's not looked good for Ferguson. And we can go back through everything that we've already said about Josh Ferguson. It's not looked good. Turbin wants to do his own Kristen Michael impression, but thoughts there. Bloom, let's start with you because we've spent a lot of time talking about Frank Gore and that Colts situation. Yeah. New report just tonight on the Newswire. It's Robert Turbin. Looks like he's going to be the man.
And I don't know if that's Robert saying much about Robert Turbin as it is saying about Josh Ferguson. And I think I said I don't even know if Josh Ferguson could be Boom Herron in this offense. He's somewhat sudden, quick in the open field. He can receive the ball pretty smoothly, naturally out of the backfield, but I don't want him running the ball in typical running plays for me. And it's very similar to Wendell Smallwood in Philadelphia. So Turbin has more to offer than Ferguson, but I don't know how much he has to offer. I didn't love him back at Utah State. There weren't really any moments at Seattle that you would hang your hat on and say that's what Seattle thought they could get out of him. He's a decent receiver out of the backfield. But this may just be a situation where Frank Gore goes out. We're not really looking at too much here unless there are other injuries that make the running back get. And I think that Boom Herron did have a few decent days whenever he was forced into the lineup for this team. But still, I'm not handcuffing Turbin to Gore. And Gore's the type of running back that I think won't necessarily break down, but he won't break down and miss a good part of the season. He might break down and lose effectiveness. So I just don't see Turbin as a priority handcuff. But I do think that some people were chasing Ferguson, and that broken down on the side of the road, the Ferguson Express now with Turbin as the backup.
Yeah, everyone's got their thumbs out trying to hitch a ride to somewhere. Let's go to running back land, Matt Waldman. Thoughts on the Colts situation and really what we've seen this preseason?
Yeah, I think that Turbin bandwagon is splinters after got run over by a Mack truck called a defensive tackle or a linebacker in pass protection. But hopefully he'll get better with that. When you look at Turbin, to me, just say, I've got one name for you. He's really just a slightly bigger, beefier version of Sean Drawn, and if you're excited about Sean Drawn as a backup, then you're excited about Robert Turbin. I'm not excited about either one of those guys. They can get the job done. And when I say that, that means, I think Indianapolis will be looking for some players who get cut and adding them to the roster.
Ronnie Hillman.
Yep. Peyton Barber might be a possibility.
They might try to keep Barber.
Brandon Wilds, if they don't keep him.
I think he got banged up. He got banged up tonight.
So you're looking at guys like that as examples of players who have talent, who might, whether they stay or they go. Isaiah Peed actually looks like a better back for the past 2 weeks that I've watched him. And when Adam Gase says we brought him as a camp body, and we got to get him more playing time because he looks good and he's not taking it to the corner store. There's a little encouragement there. There's some guys in, there's Zach Zenner. If he's probably going to stay, because they cut Stephon Ridley, but so's Dwayne Washington. But there's some talent out there that might wind up, in a situation where they could progress. Trey Williams, he scored, but again, Trey Williams is just a slightly better version of Josh Ferguson at this stage. And if he could learn how to pass block, he probably would have been the second back already because he's more talented than Turbin from a raw, just running the ball standpoint.
What's Bishop Sankey doing? Let's move on from that. But I do want to bring up Tennessee for a couple of reasons. Tajay Sharp. Matt, I'm going to start with you on this one. Again, one of those rare players that got to play both in the Shrine and the Senior Bowl, and Rashard Matthews there as well. Let's talk about these two Tennessee wideouts.
Yeah, I'm a believer in Tajay Sharp. I totally endorse you drafting him, and I would totally endorse jumping him up, even if he's a 17th or 18th round pick right now. I would totally endorse drafting him probably in the 13th, 14th round if you want to make sure you get him and make it a strong reach from that standpoint. Because here's the thing, you have certain receivers. And I'm a believer in this. You know, you have one set of receivers who are big, tall, fast, and strong, and they can make those pretty plays where they outrun you and they outleap you, or they run around you on the playground, and that really flashes. And that's something that it's easy to see. We know that that's good. We know that they can be dominant and they can score, but it's rarer earlier on in a career for a guy to get open and make the quarterback's job easier because he runs good routes. He understands how to get off the line of scrimmage and separate. He basically does everything that Devontae Parker cannot do right now. Adjust to routes in mid-route, basically adjust to throws. One of the throws that they showed against, who was it last week? It was the Giants. He ran a dig route, and Marcus Mariota knew that he had to place the ball a little further up the seam. And after he runs the dig route to perfection, he makes this beautiful adjustment to get up there between a safety and a cornerback. It's a rare play, and it's a very good one. And he's been doing it all camp long. He's been doing it well enough that he is very likely a steady drum beat, and it's getting louder and louder, and they might need to change the drum head because it's about to break through the skin. He's certainly a guy that I would feel very comfortable taking. Rashad Matthews, I think, you know, Kean Fahey has done a good job writing him up and talking about what he can do for a team, and I think that from the standpoint of if they scheme things well and he gets wide open looks, he's going to have the possibility to be the third option competing with Kendall Wright. And that's how I look at it, because Delaney Walker's the first option in this passing game, if you ask me. He's the most reliable safety blanket, but Sharp's becoming that second guy. And to me, I think that Sharp could very well wind up being, if you're going to look for a dark horse to be the best wide receiver, rookie wide receiver from a fantasy standpoint, we all know that it's a Shepard, Michael Thomas race right now. But the dark horse to me would be Tajay Sharp.
Bloom, let's talk about that and our fantasy owners sleeping on Marcus Mariota, because we've always talked about, exotic smash mouth, and they're going to run the ball as much as possible. But even if they're balanced, if Mariota's efficient, and people say, low-end QB2, what if he's a mid-range QB2? What if he's a low-end QB1? What is there with Mariota with these targets? And we've got to throw in Delaney Walker, too.
Yeah, and I've definitely been a bit snarky in my tone. Maybe the football gods are going to teach me a lesson here about Tennessee. And they've got clarity. At least they've got clarity on what they want to do, how they're going to win games.
Malarkey was good for our Steelers, man.
Yeah, he was.
He was good. It was good for Cordell.
Yeah. So look, but I'm not rushing out to get Marcus Mariota. I mean, he starts out with Minnesota. He's got Oakland in week 3. He's got Houston in week 4. Maybe come week 5, week 6, weeks Miami, Cleveland, Indy, Jackson. Cleveland, Indy, San Diego in week 9. There are some starts there that I would include Mariota in a quarterback by committee approach. But I do think it's still going to be a run-heavy team. There isn't anybody super talented in the passing game here. There's not anybody that's going to add value to his targets, okay? So I still see Mariota as not one of my priorities. I actually moved Robert Griffin III up to quarterback 15, just on the thought that either he's going to hit for fantasy or you're going to be able to cut him after a few weeks, and you're going to see that he actually doesn't have it when the bullets are flying, which I'm much more comfortable with than keeping 2 quarterbacks that I'm going to continue to switch back and forth. So I have Griffin ahead of Mariota. I think if Mariota still falls to the 20th, 22nd, 23rd quarterback, and I'm in a situation where I need a second quarterback, I'll look at him. As far as Tajay Sharp, as we're describing here, reluctantly, because I looked at Tennessee as an offense that wasn't going to elevate anybody past expectations. Maybe it'll be Derrick Henry if DeMarco Murray gets hurt with how Henry's looking in the preseason. But I reluctantly say that if anyone can get elevated, it would be Sharp, and it is because this story matches stories we've heard in the past. Say Marcus Colston's story, although again, Mariota's not Breeze, Tennessee's offense is not New Orleans' offense, but the player who impresses as soon as he steps on the field. This is also Michael Thomas's role, except Michael Thomas isn't necessarily slated to play as many snaps as Sharp right away. But impresses as soon as they show up in the building. Comes out of the OTA as a starter. His main competition gets traded. That gives him that much freedom to say we can make this move. And now you see the chemistry with Mariota. And that's the main thing, is you're seeing on the field the two of them being in sync. So would it shock me if Sharp has something like 70 catches for 900 yards and 5 or 6 touchdowns? It wouldn't shock me. Because what does he have to overcome? Rashard Matthews, who's solid. Kendall Wright. Delaney Walker, who I agree with Matt that he's still looming there, keeping any of these wide receivers from being strong plays week to week. If they're only throwing the ball 25, 28, 30 times, and you've got these targets mixed up between these 4 guys, it's going to be hard, unless it is because of the chemistry between Mariota and Sharp. And remember, Rashard Matthews is another new player in this offense, and it isn't going to be Kendall Wright, and it still will be Delaney Walker, but not to the extent it was last year, I think. So Sharp is the guy we would look at. But I've gone from down, like ice cold on Tennessee, to tepid, lukewarm. That's gaining momentum, but still not a very hearty endorsement.
Uh-oh, Bloom. Matt's trying to change the channel on you.
On me, I know. I try to change the channel on myself, actually, while I'm talking.
Okay, let's wrap this thing up with a discussion about Detroit. And Bloom, I'm going to start with you. The Detroit Lions have run a no-huddle offense 62% of the time this preseason. They ran a no-huddle offense just 7% of the time last year. When you consider Stafford putting his foot on the gas, the question marks at running back, we know Riddick's going to catch 70 passes. We know Abdullah. We'll save the Abdullah debate. I don't want to get into that right now. But in thinking about Golden Tate and Marvin Jones and Anquan Bolden, not Eric Ebron, and Matthew Stafford, no huddle? Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Cooter.
Yeah, and this is everybody has said, oh, it took this long to figure out Matthew Stafford looks good in the 2-minute drill. This is where Matt Waldman starts nodding vigorously. Matthew Stafford looks good when he can have the game come to him and play with some feel. And we'll see about the offensive line gelling, but I do think that you see more opportunity for Jones, for Tate, for, of course, Anquan Bolden, who I really think, and you're getting the ball out quickly, and you're getting the ball to someone to trust them to make the play when the ball's in flight. Bolden's going to win over Stafford. I like him a lot late in PPR drafts where a lot of wide receivers get taken and you want a depth player. And Theo Riddick out of the backfield. So I do think this will work. I think that this is something we've been hitting, speaking of the drumbeat, Stafford's going to throw 675 times. It might not be a lot of deep balls, but I think it will give a lot of PPR numbers. And I think this is going to be a good thing for Stafford and a good thing for this offense. And I will say, watching Miami tonight, I think Miami's going to be another tempo team. And just going back to Chip Kelly in New England whenever it leached in before Kelly came to the NFL, this is going to change fantasy football. I think there's a lot of quarterbacks who would probably benefit from playing the game at more of a basketball rhythm than the stop and start of the huddle offense.
7-on-7. I'd like to know how much that quarterback coach talked to you, Matt, about 7-on-7 at the youth level, high school level, college level even. Like, guys aren't playing more football, but they're passing more. And we see that trickle to the NFL. Thoughts on Stafford? Gas pedal. Hurry up. Go.
Marvin Jones will be a top 15 receiver in fantasy football, and it's because he can run every route in the route tree. He can get deep. He's not he's not Calvin Johnson, but here's the thing. We'll use the music analogy once again. When you have a virtuoso who can do amazing things and bend rhythm and bend time and make crazy runs and take over and improvise in a way that you not used to playing with somebody like that, or you are playing with someone like that all the time, it kind of takes you out of your game a little bit and forces you to accommodate to theirs. And while that's a good problem to have, everyone would want to have a Hall of Fame receiver like Calvin Johnson. But here's the thing, if you're a young quarterback and you feel compelled to go, let me throw the ball into triple coverage, let me throw the ball into double coverage, let me just throw it up for grabs because this guy's so great. There's a little bit of that where that's not all that musical when it comes to being that quarterback. So Marvin Jones is a guy that's like, no, he's not ever going to be Calvin Johnson in any way, shape, or form, but he's going to be where he's supposed to be. You're going to have Golden Tate where he's supposed to be. you're going to be able to have Anquan Bolden where he's supposed to be. So really, there might be an addition by subtraction with Calvin Johnson, because instead of having one guy who's better than all three combined, he can't be everywhere at once. So you're going to have those three guys who are actually going to be where they're supposed to be, and all of them can catch the ball, whereas opposed with, Chris Durham, everyone else that you can throw in there before Golden Tate arrived who couldn't catch a ball when he had to look elsewhere. Now he's going to have that. So I'm very happy to take Jones and even Golden Tate if I can, because I think Golden Tate, he can also get deep, but he's more of a zone player as well. He's more of an after catch player, whereas he can run a lot of good routes and get deep for you, but he's going to be more that underneath and intermediate guy and red zone guy, whereas Jones, I think, is going to do a little bit of everything for you, and he's going to be that third down guy where, when you have a quarterback who runs a pro-style offense like Stafford did way back in the day in Texas and at the University of Georgia, he's one of those guys that's like, okay, third down, who's my safety blanket where he can run the deep comeback and I can just hit that thing on time, and he can have a cornerback covering him like a glove. Who's that guy? I haven't had that guy other than Calvin Johnson, and he's double covered. Marvin Jones won't be double covered this time, and he's going to be that guy. So to me, I feel very good about taking Stafford, in that mid-round range, 9th, 10th round, and feel comfortable about what they're going to be able to do. And they did start to turn things up last year towards the end. They started to figure things out a little bit. And I believe Eric Stoner was also the one who brought up something that our favorite former Cowboys executive Gil Brandt brought up, which is I think that Matthew Stafford is the first quarterback in the history of the NFL to go 16 games in a row throwing 60% completion rate, which is odd that would be the first, but that's apparently the case. So I would love someone to fact check that on me, but it was interesting to hear.
Sounds like something Gil Brandt would have in the register, that's for sure. That's a wrap for the Audible Live. Bloom, 2 weeks from tonight. Now, 1 week from tonight, you and I will maybe be having some frosty beverages.
Yeah.
2 weeks from tonight, Carolina, Denver, time to get it on.
Yes. And by the way, I think that we have a lot to groke this next 3 or 4 days. And Matt Waldman did a tremendous look at the Cecil go. He did a tremendous thing. Check out mattwaldenrsp.com if he isn't already one of your bookmarks, because the way that you give your overview, Matt, of week 2 of the preseason, we all need to be doing that with week 3. And I see Twitter, lots of hand-wringing on Twitter about how people are reacting to week 3 of the preseason as it gets underway. And look, we all have to go down with our own takes. And if you see something in week 3 that gives you the heebie-jeebies, or you see something that should, but you say, no, I really feel like I'm sticking to my guns, that's your prerogative. That's why we play fantasy football. So don't listen to the haters. That includes Todd Gurley. Don't listen to Matt Harmon. Take Todd Gurley in the first round. Do what you want to do. It's your team. That's why we love fantasy football so much, and it's why we love all of our people. So, yeah, it's coming. The next time we're all together, there's going to be a football game that counts in the standings on, and that's a beautiful thing.
Wild, man. Let's get wild, man. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts. It's just, look, I'm just really glad that the preseason is almost over. I'm looking forward to the regular season beginning. And I just wish everyone luck in their fantasy drafts this weekend and the following weekend. And just remember that the draft, as we've talked about year after year after year, is just one leg as a part of your championship table. And so if that leg is a little not all that sturdy and a little wobbly, you can take some paper in the form of your waiver wire, and you can get enough of that paper and stick it under that leg, and you can keep that table steady.
Shot class. Shot class with Matt Waldman.
Exactly.
Get your pencil out, get your ruler.
That's right.
We'll be all right.
We'll get you all set up. We'll make sure that if your draft goes completely, utterly, totally wrong, that we can help you kind of use the resources that you did acquire to turn into a good team.
Matt, I've got to ask you, the North Carolina hat, did you lose a bet on the North Carolina hat?
No, this is my wife's hat. I just happened to wear it. I was cutting the lawn, and she didn't have it, and she's a Carolina girl. The story is that if we were to have another kid, and that kid happened to be athletically inclined, which since my wife ran a 10.9 100 when she was in high school, that if our kid got a scholarship to Duke, my wife said that I would have to leave the house and not come back and be there in Durham with the kid if I was going to allow that to actually happen. That's how much she hates Duke. So I'm just happening to wear the hat. That's all.
I ran a 10.940 about a week ago.
I raced her before the Achilles injury, and it was probably one of the most impressive things I ever saw because it was literally I was like the Wile E. Coyote, and she was the Road Runner. It was like the craziest thing I ever saw in my life.
That's awesome. Bloom has him on his shirt, but I've got him in person. The remover of obstacles.
That's right.
I got that from India, from one Sigmund Bloom.
Yeah, let's get all the obstacles out of the way for our draft and enjoy it, because it's when the endorphins really release.
Yes, definitely. That's a wrap, everyone. Thanks for listening. Check out footballguys.com. Sign up for our free daily newsletter. And if you love the Audible, then you'll love footballguys.com. He's Sigmund Bloom, Matt Waldman, for the great Dr. Gene Bramall as well. I'm Cecil Lammy saying thank you, stay tuned, and as always, stay frosty.